Hi everyone. Today I decided I wanted to get on here for a little bit for you, and I know I've gotten new followers on social media and everything. Um, I I wanted to jump on here and do like a review or a video redo um of what CACNA1A is, and um, go from there, and the disorders associated with it, the symptoms, and about that, and hopefully get into my story. Bear with me because I'm going to try to squeeze it all in one video, so we'll just have to see how it goes. So, anyways, CACNA1A is a gene. Um, and mutations or defects within that gene can cause a disease. Um, and certain defects or mutations that are within that gene are responsible for neurological conditions. So, in short, that's what CACNA1A is, to make it less complex. So, anyways, um, to have a CACNA1A disorder, you have to have a mutation or variant, or confirmed through genetic testing, usually. Um, a defect, and it's often hereditary within that gene. Um, and it is known to be a CACNA1A related disorder. So, for myself, I went through all the process, the genetic testing and everything, and I will go through my story in a brief moment, but I just found out this year, after it's been suspected for a few years up to this point. I found out in March this year that I do have a CACNA1A related disorder, genetically confirmed through genetic testing. While it's been since 2009, I've been suspected to have it based on observations, but it was never genetically confirmed as an actual diagnosis. Okay? So, I will talk about that in my story. But, CACNA1A disorder causes neurodevelopmental differences like intellectual disability, autism spectrum disorder, cognitive impairment, and stuff like that. It also causes epilepsy. So, those that have CACNA1A disorders can have epilepsy associated with it. And they could range from mild to severe, and some of the more severe cases of epilepsy can be status epileptic, and extreme cases of epilepsy. There are other disorders associated with this gene, and They are hemiplegic migraine, type 1 is associated with it. It's a migraine with aura, and it causes weakness or paralysis on one side of the body. It mimics a stroke. Other cases present themselves as having cerebellar ataxia. So, some cases within the cerebellum part of the brain, which is like back here, is where the cerebellum located. It's responsible for muscle control, coordination, balance, walking, the ability to walk, talk, and all that kind of things. It controls your coordination of your movement of your mouth. It controls your coordination of your tongue, your arms, your legs, and that kind of thing. In the CACNA1A disorder, if you have ataxia, cerebellar ataxia, the cerebellum in the back of the brain starts to shrink or degenerate. And on an MRI, it can show that it has gotten smaller. And this can lead to a progressive loss of muscle control and coordination. Like, it could cause you to slur your words. It could cause coordination problems of your arms, legs, your ability to walk, and stuff like that. And it could be congenital ataxia, which is like present at birth. Other ataxias associated with CACNA1A is spinocerebellar ataxia. Type 6 is most commonly talked about being associated with it. And this is an adult onset form of ataxia presenting itself later in life. So its onset is usually in the 40s and 50s, estimated about, where the symptoms begin to start showing themselves. So it commonly starts later in life. So with this ataxia, it's adult onset usually, and it has to do with progressive loss of muscle control, coordination, balance, slurring of the words, instability, balance, and that kind of thing. And some individuals eventually are required a use of a wheelchair or a walker or something like that. Now, there's another form of ataxia, and this is usually childhood onset or infancy. It's called episodic ataxia type 2 is associated with it. Now, this form of ataxia is very complex and kind of difficult to understand and explain. People don't see it as a severe form of ataxia, but to me, it kind of like, it ranges in severity. It can't really be judged as not being a severe form of ataxia, simply because it does involve the cerebellum, which is located in the back of the brain, like I said, and a deterioration or neuron loss or death of the cerebellum. And on your MRI, it can also show that you have cerebellar atrophy, which is when your cerebellum is smaller in size. It has deteriorated or has shrunk. And that can also present itself in episodic ataxia type 2. And I'm one to known to have it, and I have the diagnosis of episodic ataxia type 2. So that's the CACNA1A disorder I do have. So it is mildly or slowly progressive over a number of years. The symptoms are variable, and it can be a changing condition. Some people don't start using walker until they're older. Some people start using it as they're younger, but then it changes where you were using it to where you are doing better and you don't need it. So it's kind of hard to judge this ataxia based on what you are seeing at the moment. But it's said to be a slowly or mildly progressive form of ataxia. The changes are significant. It's drastic, like it can go back and forth, but at the same time, it's not significant. So, I mean, one moment I could walk around looking like I'm fine and like I do not have the condition. To the next moment, it can be extremely the opposite. So, the person with this ataxia, in addition, can have sporadic bouts or episodes of poor coordination and balance. They have sporadic episodes of visual disturbance, slurred speech, balance issues, coordination issues, vertigo, severe debilitating dizziness, and I've had moments of requiring a wheelchair during severe spells of it. In some cases, depending on how bad it gets. Now, those are the majority of the CACNA1A related disorders. Others include eye movement conditions, like nystagmus. Nystagmus is when you move your eyes back and forth and they tend to beat like that. So that's what nystagmus is. Other eye movement conditions. I know I've experienced, like eyes crossing during bouts or spells of my episodes. I've had that happen before, but up to date, it has pretty much cleared up. But that's another eye movement thing that I have experienced. Now that I went over the disorders, the thing with CACNA1A disorders is that they are challenging because it's very interesting because they seem to overlap with each other. It's hard to categorize a CACNA1A disorder as being this and that. For one thing, a person with episodic ataxia type 2 can have symptoms of hemiplegic migraine type 1 as well. So you're having an episodic ataxia type 2 episode, but you're having a migraine headache with paralysis on one side of the body. That can happen. CACNA1A disorders, in some cases, the severe disorders can be serious, and many people do not know this. Serious manifestations of these disorders can be serious forms of epilepsy, sudden death in epilepsy, severe cases hemiplegic migraine episodes that causes cerebral edema and death. So they can potentially be serious. Falls caused by seizures or ataxia can be serious as well. So, thought I'd go over that real quick. Now that I've covered majority of everything in this video, I'd like to go over a little bit of my story. So it started when I was born in infancy. I was born July 26, 1992, okay? And I was not reaching my developmental milestones. I was not walking. I was not talking or whatever. I was not potty trained when I was supposed to be. Okay? Everything seemed to happen later in life. I remember I did not learn to swim at a later age than most children. I didn't learn how to ride a bike at a later age until, than most children. So, my motor skills, my motor learning, was late, and stuff like that. So, I was evaluated to go through special education starting when I first started school. By that time, simply because I was developmentally delayed. That was my first diagnosis, was that I was a developmentally delayed child. Another thing when I was born is I had developmental hip dysplasia. So I did require to wear a hip harness. I was born with my hips being dislocated. So difficulties started like when I was really, really young. When I was born, basically. So I started special education. Everyone was afraid that regular education would have been too quick for me, and it kind of was. I didn't learn at the same level as my other peers. Though, I went through special education throughout my childhood and growing up. I was a transfer student, so I was transferred from different schools. A minibus would come and get me in a different school district that I was living in and would take me to school in a different district. So bus rides were really long, because I was a transfer student. And this went out through, my childhood years of my schooling. Because of the special education programs I was in. Now, it didn't seem like I fit into one single category when I was in these special education classrooms. At first, I was in full-time speech and language support classroom. Then I was in autistic support classroom. By the time I was in high school, I finally did the learning support, emotional support, and mainstream classroom. So the special education kind of advanced as I got into high school, in a way. But by the time I was 9 years old, despite of the learning difficulties that started when I was really young, I started having dizzy spells. Okay. They were infrequent at the time, did not mess with my development, did not mess with my daily functioning. But it seemed like as I got older, I they were becoming more frequent, they were becoming more daily, and they were becoming more severe. So they were just getting worse and worse and worse as I got older, as years went on. And they started messing with my schooling, development, and my functioning, everyday functioning. People thought it was many different things, because a lot of people thought it was psychological because I went from doctor to doctor, and it started when I was really young because we could not find what was causing my dizzy spells. So a lot of people thought it was psychological, anxiety related, causing my spells because no one else could find anything wrong. I went from doctor to doctor, had test done after test. EEGs, EKGs, I had my heart checked. I had blood work done. I was checked for diabetes. I was checked for low blood sugar. I was checked for a lot of different things. And I had the basic tests, like basic blood work, and they basically started there before they started referring me to specialists. But they couldn't find anything wrong for years and years and years and years. So I basically had to live with my debilitating condition for a number of years, and nothing would stop my condition from happening. So I still had to deal with it. I had to go to school despite of having it every day. I had to push myself. I had other people's pushing me to stay in class, to go to school, even if it wasn't doing any good, even if I was sick. I ended up missing class a lot. I ended up going home a lot because I was so ill. I started vomiting. I started throwing up because the dizziness was so severe it would upset my stomach. So, um, with that being said, by the time I was 17, but before that, I don't want to miss this part. In 2005, I had my first round of genetic testing. It is unclear or unknown as to um, how they came up with this because it was unrelated to the form of ataxia I got, and even in my family history. But for the most part, but I was tested in 2005 for hereditary ataxias caused by repeat expansions. Now, these are types of ataxias, like spinocerebellar ataxia type 1, 2, 3, 6, and so on. I was also genetically tested for Friedreich's ataxia and a couple other complicated ones I don't know how to pronounce the names of. So, the majority of them were SCA, spinocerebellar ataxias. So that was in 2005. I came to find out that the test result didn't give me a diagnosis or answer. It came back inconclusive, or a variant of unknown clinical significance in the gene PRKCG, and it was unknown as to what it meant at the time. but the gene is responsible for spinocerebellar ataxia type 14. So it was unclear at the time if it was associated with that or if it was causing my problem. So that was in 2005. Finally, in 2009, I went to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I went to a neurological specialist center down there, and they've dealt with my family history of hereditary ataxia because it does run in my family. They were smart enough to diagnose me with episodic ataxia type 2 based on signs and observations, and prescribed me a medication called exozolamide to help with the dizziness that everyone else refused to prescribe me because they did not have proof in the test result that I had this. They all looked in the wrong areas. I had several MRIs done. They all told me was normal prior to going to this doctor's office. So I had, I don't know how many MRIs done, but of my brain, but they all claimed it was normal. Wow. So I thought, yay, I'm getting somewhere, right? Finally, going to this doctor's office, I was getting somewhere. That's when I was first prescribed any medication to help with the dizziness or to help any of the symptoms I was having. So, I lived an hour away from that doctor. My family thought, well, it's time to see a doctor that was closer. So I started seeing a new doctor for my follow-ups. And in the meantime, I was doing okay for years, I was doing all right. Before I had symptoms resurfacing a little bit here and there, depending on what I was doing. So some of my symptoms started returning or coming back. So it would just depend on what I was doing, like if I would overstrain myself, carry or lift heavy things. A lot of it was brought out by heat or a physical exertion. And stuff like that. Well, in the meantime, I moved to Ohio. I moved back to Pennsylvania. And then I started going back to this doctor in Pittsburgh. My first appointment was great. I started seeing the actual doctor himself that was dealing with other family members in my family. And he referred me to a genetics counselor or doctor. Then it was time to learn more. So, after that, I was seeing the genetics counselor. We took an intake on my family history and everything. They were extremely helpful when it came to digging for information, finding out what it was. I was tested for a number of different hereditary ataxias that were different from the ones I was previously tested for. I was not retested for the repeat expansion hereditary ataxias, but I was tested for hereditary ataxias caused by point mutations or missense mutations, rather than based on the number of repeats within the gene. So that's what they focused on, was a different category of hereditary ataxias than the ones I was previously tested for. That's when I found out that the previous test that was done, where they found I had a variant of unknown significance, turned out to be benign. It was not causing my issue. So I learned it was a negative test result after all, after years of wondering what it meant prior. So they told me, this is not your issue. We're going to go here and test you for these. So I was tested for up to 1,000 different genes. And the gene that came back was CACNA1A related disorder. And they made it clear it was associated with episodic ataxia type 2. So, with that being said, I just found out March of this year, confirmed genetically through a genetic test, I have a CACNA1A disorder causing episodic ataxia type 2 as a likely pathogenic variant. Now, a likely pathogenic variant, which came back, means there's a very high chance that this variant they found causes my problem. And my genetics team were pretty confident about that. They very much think they found the answer. It's likely, instead of 100% guaranteed to be pathogenic. So it means there's a very high chance it is pathogenic, which means a disease-causing variant that is responsible for episodic ataxia type 2. However, it's not totally supported conclusively. There is a conflicting evidence of it being a pathogenic variant versus an uncertain variant. So that's why it came back as likely pathogenic variant. And they called it positive for CACNA1A related disorder. At age 28 years old. And that is my story. I hope you enjoyed this. I know it was a long video, but I hope it brought you some insight. I know I've told my story before, and I know I've gone over some of this before, but I also know I've gotten new followers on social media and everything, and I wanted to do a video review and redo. So I hope this brought you some insight, and I will see you soon. Bye now.